If you don't yet know the proper procedure for lectures, I will tell you all that I know. Assuming that's agreeable to you, of course.
Hello everyone, Space Oyster here, and welcome back to Fire Emblem Three Houses, the Ashen Wolves. In the last part, we got to explore the monastery in preparation for dealing with bandits, and now we get our first tutorial on how to instruct. Well, actually, our first instruction lesson. So I'm going to take this time to talk about each of the characters in turn, their strengths, their weaknesses, and potential things you can do with them. I will try to be as vague as possible, give you ideas of what their strengths are, but without going too into detail. So that way, you know, I'm not telling you just do this. Alright, anyway, let's start with Byleth of all people. So, Byleth is an interesting character. He's going to be the most difficult to train up because Byleth can't be tutored like the rest of the students. So Byleth is going to excel in working on his strengths in swords and brawling. He has a budding talent in Faith, which will unlock the skill White Magic Avoid plus 20 to boost his avoidance when he wields white magic spells. But all in all, despite that setback, you can do pretty much anything with Byleth. Thanks to Byleth's balanced growths, reasonable spell list, and his crest and ability not inhibiting him in any way or encouraging him to any particular playstyle, you can do pretty much anything with Byleth and he will turn out fine. That said, Byleth's overall average growths mean that he's going to be greatly affected by whatever class he's in, so he can be quite turn out to be quite slow if you turn him into a Fortress Knight, or quite fast if you turn him into a speedy class like a Swordmaster, I think. So yeah, be careful with Byleth, but he shouldn't let you down. Let's see here. Oh right, and then as for this playthrough, I plan to turn Byleth into a trickster because I think it would be funny, and I want to show it off. Next up is Dimitri. So Dimitri has a very high strength base and strength growth, so he is very well suited to become any physical class you want him to be. He is very good with lances, and he gets a personal weapon that is a lance that he can make very good use of, so training lances is a good option for him. With his budding talent and riding, he is excellent at being a cavalier and then a paladin, although since that class line gets a weakness in their speed growth, it might hamper his speed a little bit. Still worthwhile though, because mobility is just that broken. In any case, as long as you put Dimitri into a physical-oriented class using any weapon, he should be just fine. I'm going to try and turn him into a War Monk for this playthrough, because War Monk gets the skill Fist Avoid plus 20 when you master the class, and coupled with Dimitri's upgraded personal skill in Part 2 that gives him plus 20 Avoid when at full health, he is going to be absolutely amazing, I hope. Although that does mean he won't have a 1-2 range option, so it might not be that good. Dimitri's personal skill also makes him an interesting dancer, since Dancer gets Sword Avoid plus 20 when you unlock the class. But it's a waste to turn Dimitri into a dancer, since that's a support-oriented class and it would not make good use of his high strength stat. Next up, we have one of my personal favorite characters, Dedue. So, like Dimitri, Dedue is well suited to be in pretty much any physically oriented class, thanks to his high growths in strength, hit points, and defense, as well as his magic growth being extremely shit, and his spell list being the basic spell list that pretty much every character starts with, more or less. So yeah, Dedue is an amazing physical unit with all of his strengths and with his weapon skills favoring physically oriented classes. Of particular note is the Brawling skill and the War Master class. Fists tend to have very low might, so characters with high strength tend to make the best use of them, especially those with a very low speed, such as Dedue here, since they compensate for his weak area and allow him to hit hard with his high strength, even though they have a low might on their own. That said, Dedue's most interesting choice, in my opinion, is the Wyvern Lord class. Investing in the flying skill gives you the ability Alert Stance, which boosts your ability to avoid when all you do is wait. Couple that with Dedue's personal skill Staunch Steeled, giving him plus 4 defense when he waits, it can give him, or make him a rather interesting enemy phase unit who has higher avoid and defense when luring out enemies. That said, the high mobility of the class wouldn't favor him to just sit there and wait, but it is an option to pursue and one he might make good use of. All in all though, as long as you avoid trying to make Dedue into a mage, he should be pretty good for you. Next up is Felix. I don't intend to actually use him for this playthrough, but I figured I might as well cover him because he's right here. Anyway, Felix is a pretty interesting character. His not too insubstantial magic growth and a budding talent in reason might immediately make you think, oh hey, he might turn out to be a good mage, but he's not as good in the class as you might think. I would highly recommend keeping Felix into the physical-oriented classes thanks to his Crest of Faldarius. It gives him a 40% chance to deal an extra 5 damage when he uses a weapon, so giving him a weapon and having him attack as frequently as possible will give him multiple opportunities to trigger that crest. Unlike with other characters like Dimitri, where the crest triggers so infrequently, you might as well pretend it doesn't exist. In any case, even if you do invest in Felix's magic, he shouldn't let you down because you can still slap a sword on him and let him slap away at his enemies with his higher strength stat. Felix's personal skill, Lone Wolf, is what makes him a bit trickier to work with, though. It gives him plus 5 damage when he doesn't have a battalion or an adjutant equipped, or if that battalion is at 0 endurance. So in the early game, that makes Felix hit pretty hard when you have few battalions to go around, because he can still hit hard without them, and then his crest can even have him deal more damage on top of that. So he can be quite the powerhouse in the early game. But as you progress through the game, battalions will be able to give him bigger boosts than his personal skill does. So, what I recommend doing with Felix is having him focus on getting to an advanced class that only uses one weapon, such as Swordmaster, Sniper, Grappler, or Warrior. This way, you can have Felix focus on training his weapon of choice along with his authority skill, so that way you can have him equip a battalion when his personal skill is no longer the better option. Next up is Ash. He's probably the worst student in the Blue Lions, thanks to his extremely low strength and magic growths. Well, not extremely low, but just low, so he'll have a tough time dealing damage overall, but if you're lucky that should make up for it, or you can just keep using combat arts in order to do that. His personal skill being Lockpick means that he's got Thief utility without having to unlock that class, and I would highly recommend capitalizing on that by focusing on turning him into a more mobile class, such as Cavalier or Wyvern Lord. With a strength in axes and a budding talent in lances, he shouldn't have too much trouble unlocking either. And the bonus part of unlocking his budding talent in lances and sticking to horses is that he can become a bow knight in the late game, and that is a pretty really good class, so I would recommend it. That said, Ash shouldn't let you down too much, but I'm really convinced that he's probably the weakest of the Blue Lions. Next up is Sylvain, the womanizer himself. Like Felix, Sylvain seems to be well equipped to do either magic or physical classes quite well, thanks to having a budding talent in Reason Magic. That budding talent will unlock the skill Black Magic Avoid plus 20, so he can become rather dodgy. That said, I highly recommend sticking to the physical classes, not only because of his crest giving him a 40% chance to deal 5 more damage when using a combat art, but because he also gets a personal lance that only he can use safely with a unique combat art that he'll be able to utilize. Sylvain's also pretty good in the more mobile classes, such as Cavalier or Wyvern Lord, thanks to his personal skill being Philanderer. This will allow him to deal plus 2 damage and take 2 less damage if he's standing next to a female ally. So being able to move around more freely on a mount will allow him to capitalize on that skill as much as possible, such as standing next to a lady to deal some damage and then using the rest of his movement to get into a more favorable position, or what have you. So all this paints the picture of Sylvain being very good at being a Cavalier and then a Paladin in the early and late game, and then a Dark Knight for the end game. So, yeah, it's worth a shot. I did that once. He turned out pretty well. Yeah, Sylvain's actually a pretty good unit, and his personal skill can be used quite well in the Golden Deer House as well, so give that a shot if you got the time as well. Next up is Mercedes. Thanks to her high magic growth and her strengths in both reason and faith, she is definitely well suited to become a mage. She is very frail with low defenses and low HP, growths and bases, so she is not going to be very good on the front lines, and you want to keep her away from there as much as possible. At first glance, her personal skill, Live to Serve, sounds really amazing. I mean, who doesn't want to be healed while they're also healing? But in practice, it actually ends up being rather useless. Since she's very frail, you don't want her to take damage in the first place, so she's not likely going to be able to heal herself as well as someone else when she does heal. So it's not going to come up as much as you would think, despite being a pretty good skill on its own. Her crest also isn't all that useful, but having her as a healer class will allow her to capitalize it as much as possible, even though it's not all that necessary. She's also got a budding talent in bows, and when cultivated, it will unlock a skill that combat art that allows her to debuff enemies when she hits them with it. So it can be interesting to train her in her bow rank, but I wouldn't really recommend it too much. There aren't any magic classes that also require her to know the bow, so it would be for her own personal benefit if you want to work on it. That said, there is a magic bow in the game that will deal damage based on the magic stat. It'll be tough to train her up and then to utilize it, but she can make for an interesting archer to use the magic bow and use her higher magic stat to deal damage from a distance. Next up is Annette. Like Mercedes, Annette has a very good magic growth, and she excels in reason magic, so she can make for a very decent mage as well. Unlike Mercedes though, her other options are quite interesting and might be well worth pursuing. Her personal skill, Perseverance, is Rally Strength, which will give +4 strength to one ally for 1 turn. Coupled with her Strength and Authority, and if you invest in that she'll learn even more rally skills, and you turn her into a mobile class, then she'll be an effective rally unit, being able to buff at least one ally with a plethora of buffs. So, with that in mind and her strength and axes, she could have trained to become a Wyvern Rider and use the magical Bolt Axe to deal damage when necessary. But with the DLC, she has another option that is better, and that is Dark Flyer. Since Dark Flyer excels in magic, reason magic, and flying, she'll be able to capitalize on being a mage without losing the access to the mobility that she would want in order to capitalize on her rally skills. I am confident that she is going to be very good as a Dark Flyer, and I'm trying it out. Next up, we have Ingrid, one of the more flexible units in the game, thanks to her even growths in strength and magic, as well as having no weak areas to train in. She can do pretty much anything you want her to, but I'd highly recommend having her train her lances up, as well as either riding or flying to excel as a Cavalier or a Pegasus Knight. She does get a unique lance that is tied to her crest, so she'd be the only one who can use it safely and can use the combat art with it. But anyone could use that lance, so it's not exactly unique to her, but I'd recommend leaving it on her regardless. Her personal skill, Lady Knight, might favor her more for a riding class rather than a flying class, since that boosts the power of her gambits, and flying units have a very limited number of useful gambits they can use. That said, she also excels quite well as a flyer, thanks to the flying classes all having an accelerated speed growth, and her base speed growth being very good on top of that. All in all, Ingrid will turn out good no matter what you do with her. Next up, we have Yuri, the first of the Ashen Wolves. Yuri is rather interesting as a character. His strengths are pretty much limited to magic, swords, and bows if you invest in his budding talent, but he's not good with other weapons, and he's not good on a horse or flying. So he's rather limited in options. The game really wants you to push him towards a trickster, but that's not all he can do, and I would actually recommend investing in his budding talent in bows instead. Couple his Crest of Aubin, which gives him a 20% chance to prevent enemies from counterattacking, with the bow skill Close Counter, to counterattack with a bow if an enemy attacks him at close range, as well as his high speed stat, and he should have a tough time getting hit, assuming that you play your cards right. That said, he's got a pretty good spell list to go with, so he can pull off hybrid classes just as well too. There is a relic tied to his crest that can give a character +1 movement and allow them to move again after they've made an action, so he can be quite good as a dancer since he's the only one who can use that relic safely, but it should be usable for everyone, although I don't know if they would all get the full benefits of the item. Next up, we have Balthus, the currently undisputed king of grappling. While Balthus does have a 30% magic growth and he excels in faith with a budding talent in reason, I wouldn't recommend turning him into a mage all that much. His strength growth is much higher, so he can capitalize on physical classes much better, and his low speed stat favors him to use brave weapons to capitalize on his high strength and make up for his low speed. So I'd recommend turning Balthus into a physical class. His personal skill, King of Grappling, is basically Resolve from Path of Radiance, but without a speed boost, so he can do well with a low HP sort of build, using the Mercenary's Vantage skill and coupling it with his personal skill to be able to deal with enemies before they can take him out on enemy phase. It's a risky build, but he is the best one suited for it. Next up, we have Constance. This noble lady is very good at magic, as any noble lady should be. All of her other growths pale in comparison to her overpowered magic stat, so she will excel in any magical class you put her in. With that said, I would highly recommend having her aim towards Grimoire, or at least Warlock, to capitalize on having more spell uses to work with. Her default class, Dark Flyer, isn't a bad option either, and the extra mobility that it gives her is quite handy considering she is so frail. But I would recommend increasing her spell uses as a Warlock or a Grimoire, so that way she can keep the pain coming as long as possible. Her personal skill, Circadian Beat, is really good. It'll give her a buff regardless of which version of it you get, so even though the strength boost is always going to be better, the defense boost isn't unwelcome. Last up, we have Happy, and I should start off with the discrepancy in Happy's weapon proficiencies. All the websites I look at list Faith as one of her weak areas, but in-game it's listed as neutral, so I'm not sure which one is true. Regardless though, I would recommend having Happy stick to magic classes. Her growths do indicate that she could pull off hybrid classes or a physical class if you want her to, and she does have a budding talent in axes if you'd like to capitalize on that. But she starts off pretty well with a high magic stat, and she's got a good spell list to work with, so magic is definitely the way to go with this young lady. That said, she could probably pull off Wyvern Rider pretty well, thanks to that budding talent in axes. Her personal skill isn't all that much to write home about, so I wouldn't really worry about using it too much. You might need to be careful if you're dealing with monsters, but otherwise it's completely situational. Alright, and so with that that was all the characters. I'll go through the others as I recruit them, but I do intend to keep recruitments light for the sake of the story. Let's see, so for now, let me show you how tutoring works.
Thanks for the tips.
So when you tutor a unit, you pick someone out, and then based on their motivation, you can tutor them between 1 to 4 times. If you tutor a character's budding talent, like I'm doing here with Balthus and Reason, every time you tutor them 4 times in their budding talent, it'll unlock one of those 4 stars. Once you've unlocked or one of those 3 stars, and then once you've unlocked all 3 stars, they will excel in that area, and then they'll excel in that area, and then they get a new skill. I went over some of them before, but sorry, I'm having a tough time concentrating. But yeah, budding talents, most of the time they're worth investing. They usually give the character a new skill to work with. But in other times they're not really worth it. Like, for example, working on Dimitri's writing skill isn't going to help him much since I'm not going to have him on a horse this playthrough. But having CL movement is nice. On the other hand, Constance and working on Constance's brawling is not going to benefit me at all. Most magic classes can't use brawling as well as magic, or rather, most magic classes can't use brawling, so it's not worthwhile to invest in brawling, and it also makes that warm-up class very difficult to train for, because because any classes you can be in prior to that won't have access to either magic or brawling. Anyway, next up is group tasks. So group tasks are basically a way for the characters to build up their skill in one of these areas, riding, heavy armor, or flying. You pick out 2 units, they'll do that task, they'll get a little bit of skill in that area, as well as get some supports built between them. Based on how well they do at the group task, you will get some rewards at the end of each week for their efforts. So for that reason, I usually recommend picking out one student who wants to work in that area. For example, I want to have Constance Constance fly, so I'm probably going to put her here in the Skywatch, so that way she builds up her flying thing even more. And then I decide to pair her with Happy because they can build up to an A support, and that greatly increases the odds that they're going to do well at Skywatch. Whereas if I had Constance pair up with Ingrid, the best they could ever do is a 3-star out of 5. And that's basically the case for any characters you pair up who can't support with each other. But, yeah, it takes me a while to actually realize that's what I'm going to do, but that's what I'm going to do. I often recommend also having a character build up and train to become a Cavalier as soon as possible. There's a battalion you can assign that gives the skill Stride, and Stride is a very handy skill to have, because it's just a very handy skill to have. Alright, and then goals. So this is where you set up what you want each of your students to work on. At the end of each week, they will gain experience towards the skills you select for them to work on. So I'm going to have Dimitri train in Brawling and Faith to have him qualify for War Monk once he reaches level 20. It might be a difficult struggle for him because he won't be able to work on both skills simultaneously on the battlefield, but it'll be fine for him. I'm going to have Deduce stick to Axes and Brawling, since I want him to be a War Master. He does very good as a War Master, believe me. Let's see, for Felix, well, I'm not planning on using him, but I might as well get his skills in order so that way he can end up as whatever class I want him to, in the event he does earn enough experience. I think for Jits and Shiggles, I'm going to have him work on Swords and Faith, so he too can be a Trickster. For Ash, I'm going to follow my own advice here, train him on Axes and Flying, so that way he can become a Wyvern Rider and be essentially be a mobile chest opener. Sylvain's going to focus on being a Cavalier with Lances and Riding. Mercedes, I want her to qualify for the female exclusive Grimory class, so she's going to work on Faith and Reason. Annette, I told you already, but she is going to be a Dark Flyer, so she's going to work on Reason and Flying. That class is going to be seriously broken for any of the ladies that focus on magic. I don't know why it's lady exclusive. Ingrid, I'm going to have her, let's see here. Well, Pegasus Knight only requires a D in flying, and she already has that, so instead of working on her flying, I think I'm going to have her focus on training the weapons she'll need later on. So, Lances for Pegasus Knight sooner, and then Axes for Wyvern Rider later. Yeah, very, very handy. You do want to try and think ahead of what you want the characters to do as you go through things. Since I want Yuri here to be a dancer, I'm going to focus on increasing his sword skill, since the sword proficiency stacks with the dancer's plus 20 avoid sword skill. Yeah, for Balthus, I'm going to have him train as a War Master too. I've been trying him as a magic class on a different playthrough, and now I want to try him as a purely physical class. And War Master going towards a War Master seems like the most logical course of action for the King of Grappling. Let's see. And then Constance and Happy, I'm going to be very boring with them and have them stick to their the classes that they're destined to be in the DLC. So I'm going to have Constance focus on Reason and Flying, so she can be a Dark Flyer, and Happy is going to focus on Reason and Riding, so she can be a Valkyrie. Although that one makes even less sense to be female exclusive, because if it wasn't for the name Valkyrie, there would be no reason for it to be female exclusive. Unlike Dark Flyer, where you're on a Pegasus. Anyway, I'm gonna call that an episode here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.